It's the Forever Knight-A-Thon Season 2. We're recapping and reviewing every single episode of Season 2 of the 1990s Canadian police procedural Forever Knight about a vampire detective taking a bite at a crime. Season 2, Episode 8, Faithful Followers, opens on a meeting of a New Age spirituality group in no way affiliated with or meant to represent the Church of Scientology. From a legal perspective, I cannot make that clear enough. Anything I say within this video is not a statement about the Church of Scientology, but rather statements of fact about the fictional organization Luminology, who are just a group of scientists.
We are scientists, you and I. Someone comes up to you and asks you who you are, you tell them. You stand right up to them and you tell them, I am a scientist.
One thing about them you have to understand, one thing you absolutely need to know about Luminology is they don't worship the sun. Stop saying they worship the sun. That's not their thing. That'd be nuts.
People say we worship the sun. We don't worship the sun. I think they have us confused with Californians.
Instead, they siphon solar energy through a special prosthesis they put on their forehead and channel that into some sort of magical psychic power which helps people overcome their trauma. Sounds legit enough to me, but when one of them ends up dead and presumed totally murderfied, Detective Nick Knight goes undercover posing as a new convert. And this operation goes on for days, maybe weeks, and it just does not feel like homicide detectives typically do that sort of thing. It feels like a lot of time and manpower to put towards one case, while there is usually a new serial killer in the city every week. They kind of explain it away by saying that the guy who got murderfied most foul was the son of an important city official. Still, like, are my tax dollars paying for this? For Nick to spend weeks pretending to be a luminologist? It's been going on long enough that Skanky is starting to get worried. Nick's not acting like himself. Could he possibly have been brainwashed? Sure seems like it, especially after receiving treatment from Luminology's leader and founder, Matthew. He sees visions of his past and wakes up feeling refreshed and renewed, able to let go of the guilt which once held him back. But now, Matthew knows a bunch of Nick's dirty secrets. Skanky is concerned enough at this point to reach out to Natalie. She tries to console him, but she too is concerned. So with Nick out of the picture, it falls on Natalie to do what he would normally do and ask Janette to solve the problem for her. Natalie goes to the Raven, and Janette is there getting a tattoo, even though her vampire healing means that the tattoo is just going to go away. My friend, this is how you write vampires. Bored, laconic, seeking out weird sensual experiences because they've already felt everything else. This is one of those scenes that really stuck with me. Like, I remember watching this scene as a kid. It's just such a pitch-perfect characterization of how vampires should behave. There's something so unspeakably decadent about hiring a tattoo artist to tattoo you, which is gonna hurt just to adorn yourself for like a night. Natalie asks Janette if Nick is susceptible to brainwashing. After all, Janette has known him longer than anyone, and Janette claims he isn't, but like, come on. If anyone on Earth is susceptible to the process of brainwashing, it is Nicholas Knight. He is convinced to let go of his deeply held convictions roughly once or twice an episode. The minute he hears a solid argument, he's like, yeah, all right, maybe. But Janette believes in her boy, which is nice of her. In Flashbacks, we see a time when Nick was misled by his feelings. This other vampire, Thomas the Vampire, not me calling him that, that's how he's credited, that is how I will refer to him, invites Nick to an archaeological expedition where he claims that the ancient Egyptians had discovered a cure for vampirism. In order to translate their hieroglyphics, they need to invite the world's leading scholar of whatever they're doing, Helen Rushkin Slater. Of course, this is all a setup. Turns out TTV had a bet going with Lacroix to see if he could convince Nick to deliver him a victim. Got him again, Lacroix, you fucking... got him. Well, actually, Lacroix lost the bet, so I guess Lacroix had, like, faith in Nick? I thought his whole thing was believing that it was in a vampire's nature to kill, so why would he bet that Nick wouldn't? Okay, well, whatever. That's the flashback. It's meant to show that Nick is actually quite susceptible to people preying on his deepest desires. I didn't need to be told that, because it's quite obvious if you've watched the show. But that's also how Matthew is promising that Luminology can help him to move past his vampire guilt. And Nick's on board. He decides to give Matthew his considerable fortune that he has amassed over his centuries-long lifespan. They start drawing up the paperwork, but luckily, Skanky had the foresight to monitor Nick's bank records, which is good in one sense, because now Skanky knows to intervene, but also bad in another sense, because now Master Detective Donald Skanky can see that Nick, for some reason, has millions of dollars squirreled away in his bank account. An unusual thing for a not-vampire police officer to have. Meanwhile, Natalie goes undercover as a vulnerable, at-risk person ripe for the pickings, eager to be brainwashed by a cult. Now, Luminology is currently not accepting new members until the heat dies down about the guy they definitely killed. But this lady, Holly, is such a true believer that she decides to help Natalie of her own accord. And that pisses off Matthew, who sends his fixer to kill them. But that pisses off Holly, who realizes she got scammed, and none of this Luminology shit is anything. So she goes to shoot Matthew, but also blabs about how they killed the guy and covered it up right in front of Nick, who's an undercover detective. So that's all wrapped up. So was Nick brainwashed? No, turns out he wasn't. He outfoxed Matthew because it turns out Matthew was using some kind of hallucinogenic compound on the little forehead discs, which were undetectable to humans, but Nick could smell with his magic vampire nose. He knew the score the whole time, so I guess he just didn't answer any of Skanky's calls or report in or find any way to let his friends know what was happening just for shits and giggles. But hey, wait a minute. How's slippery little Nick going to explain away the millions of dollars in his bank account to Master Detective Donald Skanky? But he thinks of an elegant lie. You see, Nick has a friend at the bank who agreed to put millions of dollars in his bank account temporarily so that Nick would be a more tempting target for Matthew, who would not have had access to that information. What an airtight and, most of all, believable lie. Even Skanklock Holmes over here is convinced. Do you know what really chaps my beans about this episode, though? They take such great pains to emphasize how the Luminologists are sun-related. They use sun powers, they have a sun motif, they love the sun and all of the cool ways you can do stuff with your brain, with the sun, and how much that is a completely different thing than Scientology because of the sun, you see? Scientologists don't care about the sun, they're indifferent to it. They're so into the sun and sun accessories that they have to remind people they're not sun worshippers. And Nick, being as he is, a vampire, quite does not like the sun. He finds that old sun of ours yucky. And that irony is not explored whatsoever. How do you miss a slam dunk layup like that? Like, they believe the sun is this magic healing apparatus, and the very particular thing that Nick wants healing from requires him to avoid the sun. These things should come into conflict in some sort of ironic way. At the very least, it should be addressed. Boy, it's lucky for Nick that this sun cult doesn't require him to go out in the sun at all, that they hold their meetings at night and indoors. Otherwise, that'd be quite a dramatic and exciting problem for him to overcome. Hey, you know what else is interesting? It's Lacroix's hat. Lacroix of Arabia over here. I love how Lacroix just follows Nick around everywhere and fucks with him. No matter how often it happens, Nick is always surprised to see him. Every major event in Nick's life revolves around Lacroix in some way, and every time he's like, Lacroix, how did you get here? How did you find me? All in all, middle of the road episode. They could have done a lot more with the premise, and what little they did feels kind of pointless. They tried to tie it to this exploration of whether or not Nick is easily manipulated. But that question goes unanswered because Nick knew what was up the whole time. It didn't matter if he's easily manipulated because for reasons other than his intuitive abilities and savvy, he just so happened to pick up on evidence of this being a scam because of his magic nose. It doesn't really say anything about him other than that he's good at tricking cult guys. Could have used some more time in the oven on this one. Tomorrow, Natalie is faced with an ethical dilemma when the man who killed her goddaughter walks free on a technicality. I want to give a special thank you to my web puppets over on Patreon. We've got Wolfman Jack, Cooper Holmes, Joe McClory, Liz Widow, C.H. Phillips, Gideon, David Kaler, and Andrew Roger. And I, Bobby Duke, the star of the channel, would like to thank these other people who's also the stars of the channel. We got Jay Torney, Connor Patrick Griffin, Rachel Ratt, Cato Moore, Carpad, Josh Manes, and Hyla Tracy. Hope you're enjoying this forever night shit that Mildo insists on doing every year. I don't really get it myself. I don't know, I'm trying to reduce my screen time. That's just me, though, you know? Who cares about some show from the 90s nobody's ever heard of?